everybody to the conference itself and to this particular session on comprehensive planning. I appreciate that you were able to brave the elements to come out here when what is apparently a hurricane or tropical storm anyway. I read actually that this is like one of only 6 or 7 in recorded history that actually made it into Arizona, still a tropical storm. Usually they kind of fizzle out by this time, but it's kind of interesting. The other thing was, most of the time they form down in Central America and they kind of make their way up the coast along Baja and then come in and fizzle out. Well, this one apparently was like a category 4 or 5 at the highest strength, went out into the ocean and then made a 180 and came and slammed right into us. So it's interesting. I know you're not here to hear about meteorology, so we'll get into the comprehensive planning here. So what I'm going to do today is give an overview of planning in Maricopa County. And by Maricopa County, I'm going to focus on the unincorporated portions of Maricopa County because that's where we, in the Planning and Development Department, we have jurisdiction over. Each of the cities has jurisdiction over its own city or town, and we have jurisdiction in the unincorporated areas. Now, if you're used to working or your job takes you into the cities and you do any type of work with their planning, zoning folks, and then you come over to the county, you're going to notice there are some differences. And most of those are related to statutory requirements versus cities versus counties. I periodically get questions from people that saying, wait a minute, that's not how they do it in this city. Why do I have to do it differently over here? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today as well. So we're going to discuss what's in a comprehensive plan, what does a comprehensive plan include, why it's important, some of the nuances between the cities and counties as well. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to transition into a subset of the comprehensive planning process called county area plans. So I'll discuss those, where those are at, why we have them, why they're important, those type of things. And then we're going to just wrap it up with discussion of some of the key issues that we're facing both in the county and I think more regionally as we've done planning over the past several years. And then, of course, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those as well. I want to make this very informal, so if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and we can discuss it. I know a lot of times when they say save your questions at the end, you forget what the question was. So feel free to chime in at any point, okay? So, off we go. So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, first and foremost, I'll talk about one of the differences. Counties under state statute do comprehensive plans. Cities do general plans. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the difference is in terms of the title. That's just the way state statute has set it up. If you're familiar with state law, counties are governed under Title 11, and cities are governed under Title 9. So that's one of the major differences. But irrespective, a comprehensive plan is a document that addresses a wide range of public concerns, wants, and needs. And as we talk about what a plan includes, you're going to see how diverse the issues are in what is required. Most, again, are required by state statute, but it's a wide and diverse range of issues. The contents will vary not only by jurisdiction, city, county, but also the size of the jurisdiction has different requirements. There's different statutory requirements, those type of things. And we'll talk a little bit about what those differences are. Above all else, what a comprehensive plan is it's a decision-making guide for public and private decision makers. So public decision makers, what I'm talking about are the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now, if you're not familiar, a Planning and Zoning Commission is established by the elected officials. In Maricopa County, there's 10 members. There's 5 Board of Supervisors districts. They appoint 2 from each district, so there's 10 members on this board. They hear all cases regarding zone changes or entitlement changes, things of that nature. They are a recommending body only. So they will make a recommendation of approval, denial, whatever nuance it might be, up to the elected officials. So they are charged with using the plan as a decision-making guide. The elected officials also use the comprehensive plan as a decision-making guide when they're making decisions regarding land use, development, things of that nature. Okay, so it has the importance of that level. Now, when I say private decision makers, I'm referring to primarily businesses. When they make decisions about where they're going to locate, relocate, make investment, the plan they can look at and see what are the priorities for that particular jurisdiction. Looking forward, is this somewhere where I want to put down roots and make an investment? Citizens, when they make a decision where they want to live, they can look at the community. What are the priorities for that community? And then they can also look down to the specific neighborhood. Do I want to be in a more rural area? Do I want to be more urban, near city, shopping and employment? Do I want to be near a transportation facility? Those type of things. A comprehensive plan will do that. They'll lay those things out for them so they can make their decisions as well. Importantly, these plans are policy only. They are not regulation. And that's one of the things that distinguishes plans from, say, a zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinance is a regulatory document. A plan is merely a policy document. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuances and the importance and how they interrelate here in a second. Per state statute, cities, towns, counties all have to prepare a comprehensive, or in their case, a general plan for their area of jurisdiction. And those have to be updated every 10 years. Okay? A lot of changes occur, especially here in the Maricopa County. We're once again one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. We have been for several decades. That took a hiatus after the Great Recession, but now we're ramping back up with the population growth, and we're one of the fastest growing in the nation again. Now this, a little hard to read, but what I want to do is just kind of explain the statutory requirements. And again, this is Title 11 that we're looking at here. Let's see, does this work? Yes, it sure does. The first three deal with comprehensive planning, and that's the statute that lays out, you have to do a plan, and here's what that plan entails, and how you have to go about doing it, the public participation program, things of that nature. Okay? Now, the reason I bring those three up first, then the second two deal with planning as it relates to zoning. Okay? So this is the interrelationship. Right now, everybody in unincorporated areas, there's zoning on all the properties. Mostly it's called Rural 43 zoning. It's sort of a rural zone. It allows one house per acre, basically. There's some other uses as well, but for simplicity's sake, that's the primary use. One house per acre, agriculture, farming, that type of thing. Okay? If you have that zoning on your property, that is an entitled right under state statute. Okay? You are allowed by right to do that. A plan can't change that. Okay? But if you look at the second, these last couple here, 811 and 814, this is where planning has supremacy over zoning. So I've got my existing zoning, that takes supremacy over planning. But if I want to change that zoning, say from a rural to a commercial or a higher density residential, that's where the plan takes precedence. Because your plan, or your zone change, the proposal, whatever development you have, is supposed to be in compliance with your adopted comprehensive plan. Both the land use plan that you'll see in maps, as well as the policies that go along with the comprehensive plan. Okay? So that's the interrelationship between the two. So if you want to change it, the plan has the supremacy. Okay? So this last one here, Title 28, has to do with military facilities. I won't go over that, but if you come to the afternoon session I'm going to be doing on military facilities, it's fascinating. So that's just my recommendation. Invitation to come to that one. It's very interesting. Anyway, so what is in a comprehensive plan? Well, as I mentioned, comprehensive plans, it depends on where you're at. Not only do the counties differ from the cities and towns, but county to county it can vary as well based on population. So if you have a population in your county of over 125,000, which of course we do here in Maricopa County, there are 4 what they call elements that are required. Okay? Probably the most important is land use. That's the one that people look to, that the decision makers look to. They look at the map and see what is the future plans for this area, the densities, the intensities, that type of thing. That's always seems to be the most important. I'm a little biased on that because I'm a planner. But the second one, if there's anybody from transportation in here, would be transportation, because there's a lot of interplay between land use and transportation. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Transportation planners like to think it's the transportation, and then the land use will come. Land use planners like to think the land use, and then the transportation will follow. So just kind of depends. But certainly those two are the most important, I think, with any comprehensive plan. The other two required elements, water resources, which requires us to look at what is the availability of water, and how are you going to plan for future water needs. This is a little different because in Maricopa County, we're not a water service provider, we're not a sewer provider. So we don't have any relationship with the water itself. Those are governed at the state level. So this element doesn't really have a lot of impact on residents, but water is definitely an issue here in the county. Setting today aside, we have areas of the county that are facing water shortages, mostly in the north and northeast portions of the county, because as you know, water flows downhill, and those areas are at a higher elevation. And all the water comes down into the valley, and they're having some important water shortage issues that they have to deal with. And then finally, there's an element called energy. This is the most recently passed piece of legislation that the state requires, and it just looks at incentives for energy efficient use, greater use of renewable energy. For us in Maricopa County, that's easy because we are really at the epicenter in this country of the highest potential for both concentrated solar as well as photovoltaic solar, okay? And if you start driving out I-10 west towards Los Angeles and California, you're gonna see fields, seas of solar panels, especially out near Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, because that has one of the largest switch stations in the entire world. The power that links onto Palo Verde hits that switch station, and that power goes everywhere from Texas, Mexico, all the way up to British Columbia. So a lot of these solar companies, perfect location for sun, and they've got the infrastructure already there. So we've got a lot of solar fields out there and the generation that's associated with it. Oh, next slide. So we talked about that. Now, in terms of if your county has a population of over 200,000 people, again, Maricopa County does, there's 4 other elements that are required. There's an environmental element, which requires us to look at the effects of new development on air quality, water quality, natural resources. There's an interesting one called growth areas. And this one requires us to look at areas, if there are any, that are suitable for urban development, okay? Now this is sort of a catch-22 because the county is not a service provider for water, sewer, fire, those types of things. We have to be very careful in terms of what is appropriate in terms of urban development in unincorporated areas versus should that type of development be in the cities and towns where they have all that type of service. And then the rest would be rural, relegated to the unincorporated areas. So it's an interesting issue that we have to face. There's also a requirement for open space, where we look at the inventory and forecasting a need for open space based on future population growth. And then finally, a cost of development element, where we are required to look at the costs associated with new development and identify strategies and policies to ensure that that new development pays its fair share towards the cost of that new infrastructure and development. So, and I will say, as I said down here, there are other elements on a county by county basis. We actually have a 9th element in our plan called economic growth. So we feel that that's an important aspect of planning as well. So, but the idea here is that you can see the wide variety of issues that a comprehensive plan addresses. And the key to these things is trying to integrate all of them into, what is the interrelationship between all of those? And if you can hit on that, then you can address all of those issues. So that's the important part. So, move on. So why is planning important? Well, as I mentioned, it is necessary to fulfill a statutory requirement, but it goes above and beyond that. It protects and promotes public health and safety when you relate it with zoning as well. And it creates quality, high efficient communities. That's another relationship between zoning and planning and how they work together. It reflects, this is probably the most important, it reflects a consensus building process that allows civic leaders, businesses, and citizens to shape their future and help build civic pride and cooperation. Whenever we do a plan, it is a very comprehensive public involvement, public input process. And that involves everybody from citizens to businesses to civic leaders to elected officials to you name it, okay, that are brought together to prepare these plans. Ultimately, the idea is to get general consensus. You're obviously never going to get complete consensus. I've never seen that in a plan. But if you can get general consensus, that's going to build a lot of trust in the community amongst the groups, and moving forward, as they do different projects, they'll know and trust each other as well. I've been involved in some plans processes where some very good relationships and friendships have developed between what were once opposite parties because they came together and built that civic pride and that mutual trust. So that is probably the most important part. As I mentioned, it creates opportunities and choices for where and how people live and work. Where do I want to live in relationship to where I work and transportation facilities? Does that matter? As I mentioned, it links complex and interrelated issues. Transportation and land use. Well, those will have an effect on air quality, for instance, and the environment. How you pay for new development will affect where it can go. Those type of things. So it really is it's complex, but it really ties them all together. It allows communities to prepare ahead for challenges, manage risks, and identify potential problems and opportunities. Comprehensive plans are forward-looking plans, okay? So it allows communities, the county, to get out in front of issues, looking ahead of things, to see where are potential problems, what are potential opportunities that we can, build upon. And so what they can do then is use that plan to identify those and then have a longer-term plan, strategies to address those problems as well as opportunities. And that goes into then your fiscal plans for the government level, businesses as well. So that's an important part of it as well. As I mentioned, allows them to allocate limited financial resources by prioritizing investment, focusing on areas that they need, they know they're going to need to invest in. And it helps generate economic activity by setting up the conditions that will allow for expansion of economic growth. So, now, comprehensive plans, I know they have a lot of benefits, and again, I'm kind of biased as a planner. I think they're great, but there are limitations, and here's just a few of them. As I mentioned, comprehensive plans are policies, they're not regulations, okay? A lot of people have a misunderstanding that, well, the plan says this, therefore, it goes, and that's not necessarily true. It just depends on that interplay, like I mentioned earlier. One of the keys here is flexibility versus certainty. And this is a really fine line that we have to be cognizant of when we do plans. When we adopt a plan, or any community really, there's a certain amount of expectation from the public. Like I said, everybody came together to prepare that plan, okay? So they want to be able to use that plan going forward with some certainty. But at the same time, plans are designed to be flexible based on changing conditions. And as we know here in Maricopa County, with the growth, the change, it's constant and quite rapid. So there's that fine line between ensuring certainty of the plan and also allowing some flexibility for the plan to adapt and change. You're always going to run into issues with folks that want to take a hard line on the plan, and then you've got other folks that want to take, a very easy line on the plan. So there's got to be a fine line in there, and that's one of the difficulties. Again, it doesn't have countywide applicability. Each city and town has their own plan. Here in Maricopa County, we have 26 jurisdictions, cities and towns, in addition to the county. So being mindful of that, tying all of that together, because a lot of the issues we face are regional. And if everybody's just looking at their little piece, it's hard to tie all of that together. And then again, they have a limited duration. They're only set for 10 years, and after that, they have to be updated. So as we transition into talking about the county's area plan program, this particular graphic I put up here kind of shows you where the comprehensive plan fits in the grand scheme of things we do here at the county. Along the right-hand side, you'll see this arrow. And at the top, it says broad policy, and then it all goes down into specific implementation. At Maricopa County, we have what's called mission, vision, and strategic priorities. Many cities have the same thing. And those priorities and the vision govern the things that we do here at the county, okay? So we use those, and those are developed by the elected board of supervisors, and they're modified every several years when things change or new priorities come up. So what we do is we take our comprehensive plan and we say, how can we help implement those? And that's where the comprehensive plan comes into play. Our latest one, which was adopted in 2016, is called Vision 2030, okay? And it's based on, and there's actually a chapter in there that discusses how that plan helps implement those strategic priorities and the vision, okay? And then ultimately, yeah, there we go. This and some of the other agencies' plans flow down into the capital improvement programs and specific implementation, say, for fiscal implications. Because like I said, these plans get out in front of issues and get out in front of opportunities. So you can prioritize your financial obligations to meet some of those things. But the other thing it does is it flows into what we call county area plans. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. County area plans, well, let me back up. If you're used to dealing with cities, they're usually called something different. They're called a neighborhood plan. In Phoenix, they have village plans, for instance. We have county area plans. They're a little bit larger than what a city would normally be, but they are a subset of the comprehensive plan. So what are area plans? Well, as I mentioned, they're a subset of the comprehensive plan, and they include the exact same elements. They have to match what the comprehensive plan says, because the comprehensive plan is beholden to state statute and what those requirements are. They're smaller, they're more localized, and they identify and address the needs of particular communities in Maricopa County. Now, communities in Maricopa County and unincorporated areas are not quite as nicely defined as you'd find in some of the cities, like Ahwatukee. We kind of know where that is. But in the unincorporated areas, it's a little bit more nebulous. But we have identified those, and that's where these would focus on. They mostly surround the metropolitan area in reaction to an anticipation, I should say, of future growth. And again, they're only applicable to unincorporated areas. So now this map here shows you where our comprehensive plans are. There's 13 of them, or our area plans, excuse me. There's 13 of them. The metropolitan area is here, and as you can see, they kind of ring the area. Now, as growth and development has occurred over the past, several decades, some of these plans have been sort of swallowed up by annexations. And you'll see here in the comparison, and it kind of jumbles together, but you can kind of see where the cities are and some of these plans, okay? So the idea is that some of these plans may not be applicable anymore, and we have to look at that. So, looking at some of our current and future efforts, speaking of those existing area plans. Right now what we're doing is we're doing a couple things. We're looking at water issues up in Rio Verde. That's one of those areas where it's higher elevation, it's basically solid rock underneath it, and they're running dry of water. And that's a particular problem. There's not much that the county can do, but we're looking at potential strategies that they can do through low-impact development. A lot of people do water hauling, things of that nature. We're also looking at a complete update of the New River area plan, which is up in the north part of the county up near Anthem. So we're going to be looking at the entire plan again from start to finish and update that because of the growth pressures that are going on up there. Once we're done with that, what we're going to do is we're going to review our existing area plans and see which ones can probably be extinguished. There's several in the East and Southeast Valley that are no longer necessary due to annexations. Most of those areas have been annexed. And also in the south and southwest portions of the Phoenix area. Then what we're going to do is we're going to prioritize the remaining plans based on projected growth and anticipated growth. I imagine that's going to be mostly the West Valley and the Northwest Valley up towards Wickenburg. And then what we're going to do is we're going to prepare new area plans, because there's areas of the county, as you can see out here, where we have no plans, because growth just hasn't gotten out there yet. But eventually it's going to. Right now, most of the growth is concentrated in the West Valley, but it's going to eventually jump the White Tank Mountains. As you know, Buckeye, for instance, is growing quite rapidly. So that's what we're going to be looking at, both now as well as in the future. So I want to finish my part, and then I'll open it up for questions in terms of some of the issues and trends we're seeing here in the county and regionally, and some of the challenges we face. Obviously, population growth. As I mentioned, following the Great Recession, our population growth dropped off dramatically. We had always been one of the fastest growing, basically, since the 50s, and that slowed down quite substantially, but now it's picking up again. And so the issues and challenges associated with population growth for transportation, for air quality, quality of life type of things are something that the planning field is going to have to take a look at. I mentioned some of the water deficiencies that we're having in certain areas of the county. It's interesting because, as I mentioned, some of those areas where it's nothing but rock, and you can't drill down, and their wells are running dry. But at the same time, we have parts of the county where there's more water than they know what to do with. And that's usually draining through the valley and out towards the southwest, where you have the Gila's, Salt, the New River, Agua Fria all come together out towards Buckeye and a little bit further west. You can drill down 2-3 feet and hit water. There's water quality issues, but certainly there's tons of water there. So it's an interesting dichotomy just here in Maricopa County. The issue of quality communities for the long term. We're looking at things like the housing stock. How do we ensure the housing stock remains good? We maintain quality, high quality communities. We have several age-restricted communities, retirement communities, if you will, Sun City West, those type of things, Sun Lakes. And it's a different dynamic for folks that move into there in terms of renovations and things of that nature. And some of the housing stock, for example, in Sun City, dates to the 1950s. So it's a matter of trying to keep the quality of that housing stock up for a unique demographic we have. County islands. If you don't know what a county island is, county islands are areas, pockets of unincorporated area that are completely surrounded by cities. Okay. Now, that brings up some really interesting dynamics, because those pockets are still rural, quote unquote, that have farm privileges, farm animals, and they're bumping right up against what is basically suburban and urban type of development. So you have a lot of clashing of the opinions about what the type of development should be. So that's an interesting issue. Plus the issue is services. A lot of county islands that are swallowed up are still in the county, they're not in a city, they don't have fire protection, for instance. Rural metro's not available, and the cities aren't going to provide it because they're not part of their city. So services, infrastructure are an issue as well. Lot splits. This is a very big issue for Maricopa County. If you're not familiar with what a lot split is, I'll kind of give you an example. Say I've got 100 acres, okay? And I'm a developer or whoever. I want to come in and I want to do a 100-acre subdivision, okay? I come in, I show a plat, shows where all homes are going to be laid out, the infrastructure, that type of thing. That requires a public report, a recorded plat that's approved by the elected board of supervisors, and it addresses the infrastructure, it addresses the services, that type of thing. Anything over, if you split a lot over 6 times, it becomes a subdivision, okay? So, I came in, I platted out 100 lots. But, if I come in with that same 100 acres as a property owner, and I can split it 5 times without having to go through subdivision process, and I can sell those off, okay? So now each one of those 5 people come in, they buy it, and they split it 5 times, and they sell those off. And then those people split it 5 times, and so on and so on. So now you've got the exact same 100 lots, but it didn't go through the subdivision process. That has major implications for infrastructure, for roads that aren't paved. In some instances, people don't have access to the lots because they're landlocked. Just all kinds of issues. No services, no fire, no anything. And it becomes a problem, or it can become a problem, especially in days like this. In lot split areas, there's a lot of drainage issues. People will go in because in lot split versus a subdivision, the infrastructure to handle drainage and flooding is not there. So people will fill in little washes and then it pushes it onto neighbors' properties and things of that nature. So it's a long-term issue that we're always dealing with. Urban development in rural unincorporated areas, as I mentioned, the county's not a service provider, but we do have some pretty significant communities. Anthem, for example, is unincorporated. We have a community called Belmont. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's sort of been in the planning stages since 1991. It's on the west side of the White Tank Mountains out towards Tonopah. It's almost 25,000 acres, and in terms of size and ultimate build-out of population, it's going to be about the size of the city of Tempe, but it's going to be unincorporated. So that creates some issues. A city that size, basically run by a homeowners association. Is that the best choice to make? I don't know, but that's some of the implications we have with some of the urban development in these unincorporated areas. Protecting military facilities, and again, if you come to our this afternoon session, it's a very interesting topic. We have 3 military facilities here in Maricopa County. We've got Luke Air Force Base and a couple auxiliary airfields. There are some very strict requirements in terms of what you can and cannot do on that land out in those areas or near there, and that's based on state law as well. And a lot of people are affected by those state statutes. And then sort of that chicken and egg thing, what comes first, planning or transportation? We're always trying to get on top of that and figure out how do we seamlessly bring the two together. I probably have heard the articles about the extension of the 202 that's going to go around South Mountain and hook up to 59th Avenue on I-10. Well, we're already seeing a lot of activity in terms of land changing hands, entitlement, in anticipation of the development. So, you know, getting out ahead of those type of things as well. So that's some of the issues we're looking at. And that ends my presentation. So what I want to do is open it up to any questions that you folks have. It looks like we have about, let's see, 15, 20 minutes. If anybody has any particular questions they would like to ask in terms of planning. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned about the area plans. Do you have in the future plans of how you're working through those? I'm doing work in the West Valley and the White Tank Spring Avenue. Do you have timing for the subsequent evaluation of those plans after you get through those first 2 priorities?
We're going to start that right away. And as a matter of fact, while the 2 plans are going on, we're also going to be starting very shortly which plans to extinguish. I anticipate, I don't know for sure, but I anticipate there's probably 3 in the West Valley or in the East Valley that are no longer needed simply because there's nothing but scatterings. The White Tank Grand Avenue plan is actually an area plan I worked on. Okay. So I'm very familiar with that area. That's the area right now that we are seeing the most interest. That and then going up towards Wickenburg. And it's interesting because that's the area that's most significantly affected and restricted by the statutory restrictions regarding Luke Air Force Base and the auxiliary airfield up there. So that's one of the areas that we're probably going to be looking at as an update, one of the nearer term type of things.
How long does it take to go through the process of doing the airplane phase? Is it like 2 years? Or?
Yeah, it really kind of depends. Some of them are easier than others. Depends on the amount of community involvement. That one originally took quite a while, simply because it's a bigger area. We had to break it up into segment sub-areas because there's just so many different interests between the I-10 and the development there, much different than the Sun City and Sun City West, their interests versus the rural areas. But that one I anticipate probably, probably about a 1.5 year type of process, depending on the type of involvement we have. That usually dictates a lot of the process.
Oh, yeah,
community
that's
input, that will dictate the pace of how quickly these things occur. Yes?
So in just kind of piggybacking on what you had to say about the area plans, do you guys typically reach out to like HVACA or Ally Partnership to generate stakeholder interest when you're redeveloping the area plans? And specifically with the one you just talked about, do you specifically reach out to Luke and have someone as a stakeholder liaison when you're redrafting area plan standards?
Yes, we do. We have a very, very comprehensive list of stakeholders throughout the valley, and we know who to contact, and not only that, but to use them to get the word out to their members. You know, the West Valley very much in tune with the chambers of commerce out there and the groups. With respect to Luke, yes, we have a very good relationship with Luke. I'm sort of the Luke liaison for the county. So any type of issue that comes up relating to Luke Air Force Base, we have a very good relationship with them and open lines of communication with them.
Well, obviously, I'm a co-liver.
Mhm.
That's why HVAC would be important, and I'm
Yes.
also a Luke laser with Luke.
Yes, yes.
So, and double round.
Mm-hmm.
My other question,
Sure.
not to monopolize, was, is the county looking at, or do you ever think that they're going to implement a process by which people can access previously approved PADs, PCDs electronically as opposed to going through a document request policy, much like Peoria? You can go on Peoria's website and search by a PAD, a CMP, and access it immediately.
Yes. We have, and there's really a couple ways of doing that. We have on our website, Planning and Development Department's website, we have something called PlanNet. It's a GIS-based system where you can go on there and let's say, for example, you want to look at a particular area and say, what's going on in this area? Have there been any, you know, PADs, PODs, however, in that area? And you can click on it and it'll tell you if there is, and if so, what is the case number? What's the tracking number? And then the tracking number we have, you can take and through our on-base system, plug that in, and you can get all the information on it. In terms of the narrative reports, the staff reports, the decision letters regarding the conditions of approval, things of that nature. That's still being developed, but it's getting better and better every day.
Once you have your case number and you get to the actual document list, can you download the docs?
Yes, yes, provided we have it. A lot of these documents are old. We only have them in paper copy, but we're much more adept now with electronic copies of everything. In fact, when people come in and file their applications, everything's on a travel drive or a CD, and we just upload it into our computer system, and it goes out to the Citizens Access portal, and they have access to those documents. But it's going to take a while to transition completely because, like I said, you know, historically everything was paper, and we only in our department, as a matter of fact, have about 3 years worth of documents because of space limitations, and then anything before that's over at Iron Mountain, so we have to order up those files.
Where did you say you enter the case number once you get the case number?
Once you have the case number, you can enter it into, it's called an on-base. That's what the name of it is.
Okay.
It's called on-base, and you can find the information on that.
Yeah, that's where I saw the GIS, and then I didn't know where to go after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So you can, and again, it's GIS-based, so you can click on the different layers, and then up at the top there's an identification button. You click on that, and then you hit it, and it'll give you all the information you want about that particular parcel or parcels. There, and then we'll go over here. Yes, sir.
So when you were mentioning Anthem is still unincorporated,
Yes.
is there like a certain point at which they'd be required to like become, like does that mean they're, or I guess to become like an official city? Like what is that?
No, there isn't. Incorporation is a process in and of itself. And I'm not an expert on incorporation, but basically what happens is if you have, there's two ways of doing it. There's either through a petition to the Board of Supervisors if a certain percentage of people say, I want to be a city, and they can petition the Board of Supervisors to hold an election on that. One of the keys to incorporation is you have to have the approval of jurisdictions within 3 miles. So for example, Anthem would have to have the approval of Peoria and Phoenix, okay? Now, if you're familiar with some of the incorporation issues down in Johnson Valley and Florence and those type of things, that can be a significant impediment. About 10 years ago, there was an incorporation effort out in Tonopah where Buckeye was very reticent to give them the permission to do it. They eventually acquiesced, they gave them the permission, but they held a vote during an election and it went down in flames. So they're still unincorporated. But there is a process, and it can be a challenge depending on where you're located in proximity to other jurisdictions and how those jurisdictions feel about you becoming a city. Yeah, because the cities have also what's called a municipal planning area. So in their plans, they not only include their incorporated areas, but when they plan for areas that they think they're going to annex into eventually, okay? And so if you have another city come up, that's going to restrict their ability to grow and develop. And so they take that very seriously.
Oh, okay, so,
yeah,
so it's more that with the incorporation concerns that, like, say, the neighboring cities don't want to limit their ability to grow if, like, say, if Anthem or Tonopah be incorporated into a city.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so then does that mean part of Anthem could be eventually, like, annexed as Phoenix, or how does that work since they're?
Well, part of Anthem technically is part of Phoenix.
Okay.
There's 2 sides of I-17. On the west side is actually in the city of Phoenix. That's where most of the commercial and the outlet malls and some other commercial are here. And then the residential portion on the east side of I-17 is unincorporated. So there's certain thresholds you have to be in order to qualify for incorporation. You have to have a certain number of people. You can't have large swaths of land in order to get that population. That was one of the issues that Tonopah had. They didn't have the population threshold in a centralized area. They had to go out and reach a large area. So that brought into question the legality of that as well. So there's certain thresholds that you have to meet. I will say the Arizona League of Cities and Towns puts out a very, very good and comprehensive brochure on their website regarding incorporation, and it'll take you step by step by step. So if you're interested in that topic, I would definitely refer you to that pamphlet.
Thanks.
Yep. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, I noticed earlier you showed a flow chart regarding the process for the comprehensive plans and whatnot. There was a little segment in there where right there.
Yeah.
Below the vision, it goes straight to capital improvement program. What approval rating or what kind of criteria is needed to get to the capital improvement program? Simply because, for example, from the federal standpoint, the feds won't put money into a program for future use, for a future developer, let's just say. But it looks like Maricopa County's standpoint, you can put in monies for a future development corporation. And does that developer help or do a cost share with that infrastructure needed to support that new development?
Well, and this is just a generalized idea, but the idea being that based on the comprehensive plan, the policies in there, again, as I mentioned, the idea is to get out in front of issues and concerns and problems. So you can identify, okay, we needed to identify new areas of open space if necessary. Do we want a new regional park, for example, somewhere? How do we pay for that? The roadway system. We know there's going to be a lot of development coming out to the West Valley. A lot of those roads are right now dirt. How do we pay for those types of things? Because we know the growth is coming there, we have the policies in place in our transportation element, for example, and our air quality to pave certain roads. Now that those types of things can be rolled into capital improvement programs and ultimate funding. Again, it's just, there's nothing specific, it's just generalized speaking. because you have identified your problems and your opportunities, now you can prioritize those financially and drop them down into the CIP and ultimately your budget. And the same holds true for, you know, some of the other county agencies up here. So, and it all starts with the strategic priorities. Okay? And so the other county agencies develop plans to help implement those as well. So it all kind of fits together and flows down into the bottom, which is more the specific implementation strategies.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Right now, we're in the process of updating a few of our master plans for parks, like McDowell Master Plan is being updated. Now that our master plan will be completed, that would then be incorporated into the county's overall comprehensive master plan? Okay.
Yes. In our open space element, what we don't do for logistic purposes is take the plan and repeat it in the comprehensive plan, because this will change and then we got to go back and change this. So what we do is we reference the plans.
Perfect.
We reference the transportation system plan that the Department of Transportation puts out. We reference the parks plan, the Maricopa Trail, the regional trail system, those type of things. So that way, if changes occur over here, they're still in the comp plan. You just strike them. Yes.
You mentioned that cities have, they include some of the unincorporated areas under county jurisdiction in their municipal planning area. When you go in to do a general plan amendment or a comp plan amendment on the county side, how much do you consider what the city has done in planning county areas that are not yet annexed into the city?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We definitely take that into account. So if someone comes in and says, I want to change the plan from this to this, we know that's in some cities' municipal planning area. We look at their plan. We always take the case and route it or send it to that affected jurisdiction for their review and comment. And then ultimately that goes into the decision-making process. It's not a hard and fast rule that we follow it. It's not a hard and fast rule that we ignore it. It just kind of depends on really the location of these. There are some cities that have very, very large municipal planning areas that they couldn't grow into in 150 years. So you kind of weigh what's the validity of that versus, and some of that was based on the annexation wars of the 80s and 90s. They were trying to cut each other off. So the municipal planning area is not just something that the cities will put in their plan, but it actually has some authority to it. Because what happens is if you have an MPA, that basically establishes their service area for sewer, okay? So if someone wants to come in and put a development in there, they cannot form a improvement district, or they can't establish a new service provider without the authority for sewer, without the authority, without getting a 208 amendment, which is part of the Clean Water Act, through the Maricopa Association of Governments. Okay, so this city would have to sponsor that amendment to allow them to form a service provider for those. And if they say no, that's not going to happen. So that's one of the tools that the cities really have authority over unincorporated areas. It's just simply sewer service.
Then I guess let me switch that question around also. You mentioned how the county staff reviews or considers the municipal planning area. What is required on the applicant's side to identify and in the application or the narrative, how much do we refer to the adjacent city or the
Sure.
city's municipal planning area?
As part of what we have a public participation program where when we know it's within a certain municipal planning area, before they even file, we'll recommend that they go talk to the city based on the density that they're proposing. And really, it comes down to sewer service. If it's a low density, they're doing it on septic, they're pretty much on their own. But if they know they need sewer service, the only way they can get that is from the city. So we'll tell them ahead of applying, it's like, go talk to the city because we don't want to waste your time or our time or the city's time if they're going to say absolutely no unless you annex. A lot of the cities, see, the thing is the cities are very different in terms of how they approach this. Some cities are like, yeah, that's fine, it's a long time out, we'll let you form a bring in a provider. Others will say, nope, you have to annex, or we're not gonna budge on it. So it just kind of depends on the dynamics. And I've seen cities change their policies based on, you know, elections and things of that nature.
Yeah, a lot of West Valley is already private utilities, so.
A lot of them,
so that takes
yeah,
the sewer
yeah.
issue off the table.
EPCOR is the big one out there. But in other areas of the county, that's not the case.
Right, right.
So,
Thank you.
and that was a big issue with Glendale a few years ago too, is that area around Luke Air Force Base, because that's within their municipal planning area. And there was a lot of discussion and, you know, is Glendale gonna serve this? If not, they don't have the infrastructure to serve it now, but there's a lot of pressure, we wanna go now. Let us form our own, you know, company, so. Any other questions? It's right on time, so it's 11:30, so. If there's no others, I'll let you go and, invite you to the 12:45 one on Luke Air Force, or the military facility. It's a very interesting topic, I love it. I'm knee-deep in it every county, so it's interesting. So thank you again for coming. Hopefully you found it interesting and answered some of your questions. And you know, enjoy the rest of your conference and stay dry. Thanks again.